Hi, welcome to QA Scripts. In this video, we will learn about constructors. What is constructor? Before understanding what is constructor, let us take a simple example. Here I have a form called sign up. Inside this sign up, we have three fields. One is first name, last name and email. So those three are edit fields in our application. What I want to do, I want to enter data inside this first name, last name and email ID. To do that, I have one simple test case or test script saying enter fields. Inside the main method of that particular script, I am using WebDriver and trying to enter first name and last name. That is WebDriver dot find elements of first name dot send keys, where I am not hard coding anything. Instead of that, I am putting variable, that is first name. At the same time, here I am trying to send, or I want to place last name. Again, I am not using any hard coded value. Of course, the syntax of find elements and WebDriver are not correct, but here I am just taking to give example. So think that these two lines of code will help you to enter first name and last name. But where is the value for first name and last name? In my second slide, what I have placed one class name, that is read data from Excel. Inside the read data from Excel class, I am defining two different variables, that is string first name and string second name. And I will write one method called Excel data. Inside the Excel data, I will have a particular code to read the data from Excel, that is from the cell called first underscore name. There we have data called QA, that is cell 1 of 1 have data called QA, that it will read and it will assign to the variable called first name. In the same way, I have code to read data from last underscore name, that is cell of 1 comma 2, and it will get assigned to a variable called first name. Now, so this piece of code will help you to read the data from Excel sheet. So the same variable, that is first name as well as last name variables, I have used in my test script here. But how to get the data? Is it possible to do in this way? Like, I will modify that test script where I will create one object using read data from Excel class. Then I will call the method called object dot Excel data. Then I will call the method where I am going to enter the first name and last name in the application. If I modify my script and execute, what happens? It will of course call that particular method and it will read the data. But after executing this piece of code, and when compiler comes to the enter data method, the value for the first name as well as last name will be null, because the first name and last name are defined in that particular class called read data from Excel. So it will not be able to get the data out of that particular class. So you cannot do in this way. So what is the alternate way then? So what actually I would like to do here is, before executing enter data test script, the class, that is read data from Excel class, must be executed and it will be having data ready to use. How to do it? We can do that using one method which is having same class. here if you look at the method, what I've written inside this circle is enter fields. The test script name, that is the class name, is enter field data, sorry, enter fields, and the same enter fields keyword I am using, and I am creating one method. So this method we are calling as a constructor. So what is constructor? The constructor is nothing but a method having same name as class. So inside the constructor I am calling one method called Excel data. This method will read the data. So I will give more explanation about what is the importance of this particular constructor, but as of now think that constructor is nothing but the method having same name as a class. Again, the remaining piece of code is very simple. Here I have a main method. Inside the main method I am calling enter data method. In enter data method I have two lines of code to enter first name and last name in my application. So what is constructor? Constructor is nothing but a method having same name as class. Constructors are called or invoked when an object of class is created and cannot be called explicitly. So what is this point talks about? It says that constructors are called or invoked when an object of class is created. It means, let us take this simple example. Here what I am trying to do, I have created one class called constructor, and inside that I have one method with the same name, that is constructor. So in the constructor I am having a simple message called this is constructor. Above this constructor I have one more method called enter data, and I am displaying a message called this is simple method. So what my point says, constructors are called or invoked when an object of class is created. Let me create one more class called execute constructor, and let me create object of class called constructor. So what I will do, I will create one object using constructor class. Let me say obj equals to new constructor. So according to this statement, constructors are called or invoked when object of class is created. Yes, I have created object of class. Let me execute. So when I execute, immediately I am getting the message as this is constructor. Where is that method? That method is present inside the constructor. Hence that point says that immediately after creating of object, the constructor will get executed. In the sense, you can have n number of methods in a class, but the class will give first preference to constructor. Even if you don't call this constructor also, if you just create object of this particular class, the constructor will get called. That's why here it says that constructors are called or invoked when an object of class is created and cannot be called explicitly, and it means that there is no need of calling that particular constructor. If you create object, that's enough. It will get executed and it will get called. But it is not same case with other methods. Here there is a one method called enter data. Until otherwise you call this enter data method, the message which is present inside the method will not get executed. So let us call that enter data. How to call enter data method? We have to say object dot enter data. Now let me execute this piece of code. When I execute this piece of code, I will get two messages. One is this is constructor, means this message is coming from constructor. Then here there is a method being called, hence that particular message is getting displayed here as this is simple method. So it means constructor will get executed immediately after creating one object, even before calling. But if you want to execute a piece of code which is present in any other method, that method has to be called explicitly. Java constructors are the methods which are used to initialize the object. Yes, we have seen in our example where we are trying to initialize, means we are trying to call methods which have to be executed before any other methods. The data, the method what it was reading XLC to data, that method we placed inside the constructor, so that when we start executing the script, that particular class or method will get executed first, so the data will be ready, then remaining code will be executed. Hence it says that Java constructors are used to initialize objects. Types of constructor. How many types of constructors we have in Java? There are two types of constructors in Java. One is default constructor or no arguments constructor. Another one is parameterized constructor. Here is a simple graph which shows what different types of constructor. What is default constructor? If you don't define a constructor in your class, then the compiler will create a default constructor. Default constructors do not contain any parameters. Default constructors are created only if there are no constructors defined by us. Let us see with example. Here is a simple class called example for default, where I have two variables. One is int id, another one is string name. Inside this class I have one method called display, and I have a simple statement like system.out.println, and I am trying to print out id and name. Inside the main method I am creating one object using class called example for default, saying s1, that is object name. When I say s1 dot display, that is method, so this method will get called, and the message which is present inside the method called display will get executed. Let me execute this entire class. When I execute, here I am getting the result as saying 0 and null. So that's what here it says. The default constructors are created by compiler if you are not created. I have not created any constructor here, but at the time of execution, compiler will create the default constructor. And also it says that default constructors do not contain any parameters. That is okay. There is a one more point. What is the purpose of default constructor? Default constructors are going to use to provide default values such as 0. If you look at this example, I don't have constructor, so the constructor will get created by compiler, hence the default value it is getting passed from that particular constructor, hence we are getting the value as 0 and null. Now let us create the constructor, default constructor, and let us pass the value. Let us see how it's going to be executed and what will be the output of this particular method called display. I have modified the class where I have written one default constructor, that is example for default. It's a name of method and method of class is same. Inside the default constructor I'm passing the values as id equals to 10, name equals to QA scripts. Let me execute it. So here it says that 10 QA scripts. So if you pass any values inside the constructor, those values are going to be considered. If you don't pass any values, then what happens, it will pass the default values, that is 0 for id, that is int variable, and null for string variable. So the default constructor is going to create by compiler if you don't create by ourselves. Here I have created the default constructor, so it will not create by compiler, but the value will be passed as a default values if you don't pass any specified values from your side. Here again I have modified. What I have modified, I have values inside the constructor, that is id equals to 10, name equals to QA script. But after creating object using class called example for default, here I'm trying to assign another value, that is s1 dot id equals to 20, s1 dot name equals to India. So inside the constructor I'm passing 10 and QA script, but while executing inside the main I'm passing id as 20, name as India. Let us execute and let us see what values we are going to get for this name and id, whether 10 and QA scripts or 20 and India. So it is taking 20 and India. So it means that if you pass any values to the variable, those values are values of variable will going to consider first, but if you don't pass any values, then the default value what we are passing in the constructor is going to consider for the displaying message. I think it's very clear. Here if you remove these two values what you are passing, then the values are going to take it from constructor and it will display as 10 and QA script. If we pass any other values other than default value, we are going to take it and execute. If you remove these values as well as the values inside the constructor, then the default value, that is null and 0, will be passed from the default constructor. So this is all about default constructor. So default constructor is nothing but a constructor having no arguments, and it will be created by compiler if you don't create, and it will provide default values if you don't pass any values for that particular variables. Let us look at another type of constructor, that is parameter constructor. What is parameter constructor? Parameter constructor is nothing but constructor that have parameters is known as parameter constructor. Let us look at the Eclipse. Here I have one class called parameter constructor, that is name of my class. Inside that class I have two variables, one is int id, another one is string name. I have created one constructor with the same name, that is parameter constructor, but I have passed two parameters as arguments, that is int I comma string n. So those are nothing but parameters, hence this entire constructor is going to call as a parameter constructor. Of course you can have default constructor as well as parameter constructor in the same class. So if I want to create default constructor, I can create easily using the name of class. let me create it. So there is no error. So Java supports default constructors as well as parameter constructors can be placed in the same class. So here what I have done, I have used parameters for the constructor, and I am assigning those parameters to the variable called id. So I is going to assign the value to id, that is variable, and n is getting values from somewhere and it will assign to variable called name. So there is a one simple method called display. Inside the display I am trying to print out the message saying that system.out.println id space name. How to call this constructor? Yes, again I have to create one object if I want to execute this particular class. So I am creating one object saying parameter constructor s1 equals to new parameter constructor. But here is the difference. In our previous example there was no parameter constructor, there was only one default constructor, so we were not passing any values. But if we have a class with parameter constructor, then we have to pass the values to the parameters. Here I am passing the values as 45600 comma mic. So mic is string, so here is the string parameter what I am passing to the constructor. When I call this method, that is display method, by using object, that is s1.display. So let me execute this class. When I execute this class, what happens? It will say 45600 space name, that is name what I have passed. Like this I can have parameter constructor as well as default constructors. Example of constructor overloading. What is overloading? Overloading is nothing but a method will be having same name but different actions based upon the parameters. If you look at this piece of code in our Eclipse, here I have one parameter constructor where I am having parameters, two parameters, one is int I, another one is string n. At the same time I am having one more constructor with the same as class name, but the parameters are three here, that is int I, string n and int a. So three parameters in second constructor. In first constructor only two parameters. Like that you can have overloading. So Java supports constructor overloading. The constructor name is same, but the activities which inside that constructor will be different. In this case I have only two variables, that is id, and I will get the data from I, and name, it will get data from n, whereas second constructor has three different variable where id gets value from I, name gets value from n, and age, that is another variable, gets value from a. So this is a overloading concept what we can use. If you want to know depth about overloading, I have other videos in OOPS concept. Please go through that particular video, then you will understand what is overloading. So here my point is, I want to showcase that constructor supports overloading, or Java supports constructor overloading. So here I have two parameter constructor with a different signature. This is nothing but signature what we call in Java. The number of parameters is nothing but signature in simple term. So as usual, we have one more method called display. Inside the display, I am trying to display ID, name and age. So I am creating one object using parameter constructor class, and I will name that as a S1. So if I want to execute this, what I have to do, I have to pass parameters. So the uh, how many parameters you will pass, that based upon that passing values, the constructor will get called. For example, if you say only two parameters, then the first constructor which is having two parameter will get called and it will get executed. So I will say 45600 comma string, that is Mike. So this will call the first constructor having two parameters, and it will print out only ID and name. The age will be 0 as a default value, which is going to come from the default constructor. Of course, default constructor I don't have here, but the compiler will get create. At the same time, another object I am creating, that is S2, where I am passing three different arguments, and this object will going to call the another parameter constructor having three parameters, and it will display as ID, name and age, that is 40. So one method, but it will act different in different condition. That is what we call as overloading. So here I would like to make some points. A class can have n number of parameter constructor, but a class can have only one default constructor. Let me create default constructor. For example, here is the default constructor. It will allow you to create one default constructor, but if I want to create one more default constructor, let us see what happens. When I say default constructor, again it says some red mark, and it says that rename this method. It means the Java will not allow multiple default constructor, but Java class can have any number of parameter constructor, because it supports overloading. Now let us try to execute this piece of code. When I execute, I will get two messages. One is 45600 Mike and 0, because the first constructor having two parameters will called first, and it will display ID and name, and age will be 0, whereas second object, it has passed three different parameters. So those three parameters are getting printed out here. What is the difference between constructor and a method? Here is a simple table where I have given difference between constructor and method. Constructor is used to initialize the state of an object, right? So here we are using constructor to initialize a method, initialize an object, whereas method is used to expose the behavior of an object. So method will have a specific line of code, and those specific line of code will have a specific task, something like enter the data or multiplication or any arithmetic operations, whereas constructor will not have such kind of activities, but it will be having all the initialization variables or methods. Second point is constructors must not have return type. Yes, we have observed that we used public and constructor name, but we have not used constructor void or any return type. So any constructor will not have void or return type, whereas method must have void keyword or return type. Constructor is invoked implicitly, in the sense it is not necessary to call that particular constructor. If you create object, that's enough. Immediately the constructor will get called and it will get executed. Whereas method, it is necessary to call implicitly. Until otherwise you call the method, the piece of code present inside the method will not get executed. Java compiler provides a default constructor if you don't have any constructor. We have observed that method is not provided by compiler in any case. Yes, the method will not get created by compiler, whereas default constructor is going to create by compiler if you don't have default constructor in a class. Constructor name must be same as class name. That's what we have observed. Method name may or may not be same as class name. For any doubts or help or any questions, please contact us on info@qascripts.com or qascripts25@gmail.com. Thanks for watching this video. If you like this video, please click on like button. Thank you.